Okay, so without further ado, I invite the Prime Minister. Here.
Am I audible?
Yep, you are.
Okay, let me set my timer first. UI preference, just raise your hand. And I'm starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. A little clarification before I'm starting into my contribution. I said that our side, we think that regretting the rise of drag culture doesn't mean we regret the existence of drag in mainstream media. But we think that we regret that it's been risen because we regret the idea of representing drag culture is not happening as we want. Like we are sure that what opposition want is to be to the drag culture to be represented, but we think that by its being risen in mainstream media, it's not representing the drag culture in the society. So before I move into my contribution, here's some characterization of what mainstream media looks like. I think mainstream media is, of course, media that all type of people use, e.g., like television, radio, social media, and etc. So a little setup first. I think most of people that use mainstream media are people who look for entertainment, and there are common people, also kids. There are kids. There are parents. There are people from the place that is a small city, etc. There are people who we cannot control their perception. We cannot control how they see something, right? And second, I think to be showed in mainstream media, to be in this mainstream media with such audience, those media have the regulation. They have the restriction, like censorship. Hence, you cannot show boobs there or boobs in the media, mainstream media or whatever freely there because yeah, they have their restriction. They have their regulation, meaning that to be shown in mainstream media, you should change some part of it. You should change some part of the representation to fit in the regulation, which is bad for the drag culture for the drag culture itself. Is that MPI?
Yes, I think that your concern is just about whether or not that we can bring a more appropriate representation, which I don't think that in mainstream media we make it sexual like in establishment.
Okay, I don't say that we should make the appropriate representation, but I will tell to you why then this adjustment into the social media, into the mainstream media would be a backfire to the drag culture itself. Like wait into my contribution. So I think yeah, those adjustment is going to be bad for the drag culture representation. So moving to my argument then. My first argument is going to be about drag culture's exploitation and drag culture false interpretation. Why is it true then? I think drag culture is something that not all people okay with, right? Like in status quo, we see a lot of people using that culture as something entertaining, as something to be mocked on. Why? Because all the content of drag culture that are appearing in social media, in mainstream media right now, it's just like a video about a man who are dressed like women, and and people are starting to mocking them in the comment section, in everywhere. So you see the repost and the share feature are used for people to liven it up, not because people trying to to spread of the awareness that drag people are deserving to exist in our society. Not because that, but it's because they are want to mocking all of the drag people, and we cannot control it because again, mainstream media is used by all people that we cannot control. Where's their study, what's the perception of something like a drag culture in social media. And talking about the popular slang like slay or whatever, that as those are used to mock them, not only them but also gay people that not even a drag, not even part of the drag culture, etc. So and B, I think as a result of the rise popularity itself, drag is being used to rise the TV show rating, for example, not because they want to drag to be represented, but because those TV producers are seeing them as source of money, source of profit. Because again, of course, a TV production want profit, right? Like they want profit to their TV shows, their media, etc. So as those drag culture are seen as something to entertaining by the society, they want to use them to be the tool to rise their rating, right? So those drag accept the offer to appearing in their television show. It's because they thought that they are being valued, they are being represented, while in fact they're not. They're being loved and they're being mocked on the TV shows and whatever. And the second point is going to be about fake representation. So due to the fact that there are a lot of mainstream media policies, e.g. censorship, and there is an adjustment for those drag to be fit in the mainstream media, when you say you want to represent them, in fact, what you show on the media is exactly what the media wants you to show, not something that you want to show in the media. Like something to be loved on, something to raise their rating, like what I explained to you. That's because you wanted it to be shown on mainstream media, right? And why is it oh yeah, and here I have the counterfactual here that we can just use the other media to represent drag. Like instead of mainstream media that is clearly bring false illusion of representation due to the wrong perception, due to the wrong interpretation, due to mainstream media regulation, we want them to be represented in their own media, such as like literature, where you can express the real drags are with the exact audience that really want to know about drag after they saw like the drag culture that isn't so resonant in mainstream media, right? So what we want to achieve in our side, in the end of the day, we think that drags never wanted to be famous. They want to be represented and be accepted within the society. So therefore, we prove to you how then the current status quo is not helping them achieve their goal, where they are be so popular in the mainstream media. Instead, we're kicking them out of the society because most of people that are using mainstream media is not actually care for them. So that's why I think for okay, thank you.
Thank you for that speech. Now I invite leader of the opposition. Here.
Am I audible?
Yep, all good, Kak.
Oke, POI through chat ya. Okay. I'm going to start my speech in 3. Bentar. Let me bold it first. Okay. Going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Back in the early 70s, the only profession that a lot of drag queens can have is to be a local performer in the local bar that they are in New York or in some more progressive state in United States of America. In the current progression, with the rise of popularization of drag culture in mainstream media, has allowed an expansion of what you can do as a drag queen. It allows more opportunity and it allows more room for you to be able to not only make a presentation and also to make sure that you can cement what the definition of your gender expression is, but also to allow the ability for you to monetize it like RuPaul did, right? So when they say that the commercialization is bad because it's going to be extracted by common people, I don't think that is what realistically happened in current status quo, because within the popularization of it, I think that there are so many influences that are done by the people that are in the community themselves, right? It is not like feminism where it is super saturated. It is a very concentrated community, regardless of, let's say, regardless of how popular it becomes. But I would like to clarify a few things. The debate probably will not talk about the extreme conservative, because any perception reaction that they have in regard to this community will not be affected to some certain extent to us. The only thing that it will affect is the feasibility. But even in feasibility, I think that the extreme conservative will find ways to be able to know the drag people in their local area, because the very nature of drag queens and drag culture is not about being in closet. It's all about being bold, and it's about exposure. So you would still go to the local bar that you have and perform. You would still make sure that you are going to rally on the street in your drag costume to protest, right? That show that visibility to what the conservative informative are something that would still happen. News coverage would still be there as well, which would be extended later. But the key point of a debate in this debate is on its mainstream media. That is to say that we're talking about all type of content. Affirmative argue that this is on short form of video and social media, and don't try to clarify this by saying that just an example, because a lot of your argumentation and harm are very dependent for this to be the definition of mainstream media, which are not. These are not comparative to the full extent of what mainstream media is. This also means we are talking about, let's say, the existence of, let's say, coverage through TV station, which are owned by public or private, that doesn't matter. But on top of everything else, this also means to be able to bring up your show to, let's say, YouTube channel. But so all type of form, right? Not just short video on Instagram, but also full show of podcast and all that. But the current rises are spreaded by the drag queens themselves as well. Let's say RuPaul Network are owned by RuPaul themselves, or like other type of drag queens. Even though that it is not owned by the drag queens, it is still owned by people who are progressive to some certain extent, because it is not something that, let's say, conservative want us to associate themselves with. A lot of, let's say, a lot of politicians that are conservative, I forgot their name, that used to do drag, try to be able to disassociate themselves, because that is not something that they want to be known for, right? So this is something that can be controlled to some certain extent. So it's a bit confusing as well. If you notice, they don't want it to rise, but they also want to keep it in mainstream media. I don't understand how they could be able to control, and the degree of control that would happen under their proposal. So let's just let the debate stop there. Sorry, QI through chat. I'm going to give it later. So what has the rise of the drag culture in mainstream media facilitated, right? I think that the rise indicate more media coverage, more people consuming it. Those are the two things that can be sure that you have from the rise. What has it facilitate is that first thing is it increased more meaningful visibility. Other the rise in mainstream media open up more room for visibility on the culture and the people. That's the first thing, the existence of the group and all the associated culture that they have, but also visibility on variety. Now we know that there are a lot of drag queens that can also be a cishet female, trans person, gay, or even cishet man, that all type of variety of these drag queens. Why does it matter? They're probably going to assume that this is a bad thing. So this struggle that the drag community are suffering from are the constant stereotype on the generalization of drag equal with trans, which is not the case, because throughout history, the general populace of society always assume just because you like to, let's say, dress up in a more feminine and exaggerated way, meaning that also define your gender, which now with the increased number of visibility on variety disprove that particular claim. It might not directly educate the general populace, but it probably means that there would be constant exposure with people like in RuPaul Drag Race, for example. You see there are straight cishet men who have a girlfriend who can also be a drag queens, and that doesn't really, let's say a lot or like define their identity on gender and sexuality. But on top of that, the drag community also suffer from the constant stereotype on their line of work. In US, a lot of drag community come from the most unfortunate places where they struggle to get job opportunity and left them with very limited option of professions such as singing in a bar or performing in specific establishment, which has result to common societal misunderstanding and generalization that drag queens are equal with prostitute or people that are just specifically working at night, right? We don't think that this is unhealthy representation, and the rise has helped to facilitate the improvement of this opportunity, which also translate for people to now understand that drag doesn't equal with this type of line of works, and this is just a very specific type of activity that people do. Yes, POI.
What makes you think visibility is equal to productivity?
Well, it might not always equal with productivity, but more number of visibility always equal with more resources. It always equal with more people consuming this type of content, because like you say, there is adjustment. It will not always means that you are going to, let's say, sexualize all type of content. That is not true, right? And that is the reason as to why RuPaul can have, multiple season. I even forgot how many season it already has, because even though that the societal acceptance on drag are not as widespread as that is, there are a lot of people that like the type of content and presentation of entertainment that is presented here, which contribute economically to the The are part of the community. That is undisputable. But why this is an essential answer? Because variety means complexity on the drag community, which reduces the simplification. These are the type of productivity that we exactly needed, but awareness are going to always pick with more curiosity. Funny thing is that reaction that people have are not always directly negative, because we're not talking about the large conservative. They misunderstand. They are not always aware, and that's the reason as why exposure always going to result with more consumption of this particular product, which is what we need more than proud to oppose.
Thank you for that speech. Now I invite the Deputy Prime Minister. Here.
Hello. Am I audible and feasible?
Audible ka?
Thank you. POI through chats or raise hand. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Long time ago, a drag culture can perform in local performance in opposition side. Right now, those local performance cannot even perform anyways because of the explosive response from the lawmakers and so on and so forth. This is the issue that you need to really take into your note. The issue in this motion is that it isn't specifically put burden on government to say that, oh, we against representation and we get against productivity, but rather whether the rise is significantly productive for drag culture. Exactly when she responds to my point, right? But secondly, what is the rise then? The rise is more drag queen are being used in movies as entertainment being or as an entertainment being or comedian. This is true. They're always in a character that is very much clownish. Even if you want to say no, drag can be as true as they are on a mainstream media. We say no because there's process of compromising to larger audience, or else you are being kicked and you are not profiting off of your media, right? What does mainstream media look like? First, larger audience that they talk about, but they take it for granted. Opposition cannot take it for granted, right? Larger audience doesn't always equal to larger understanding. The fact that the rising doesn't symmetrically with the acceptance speaks volume due to the fact that drag culture are represented very well. But secondly, why all their benefits will be untrue? Compromisation is something they cannot deny. Why? Mainstream media inherently has censorship. One, age appropriation. Secondly, majority dominance. What's the harm then? More drag people has to fit with certain majority rules, meaning larger misrepresentation and will be a rise in their side of the house. We prove to you that the rise will most likely happen in a very misrepresenting way due to the compromisation that you cannot say. You need to prove why the compromisation is not exist. But secondly, otherwise you'll be kicked out, right? If you're not going to compromise this. I'm going to take it later. What happened when it's rising then? There's a big dominance in recruiting. Yeah, they say resources, but there's a big dominance in recruiting drag characters, but being a side character, but even if it's true that they're being recruited, I'm questioning to them how media will gladly being canceled by the majority for standing up for drag culture. None. What is our stance then? Our stance is that we want drag culture to be promoted in the most exclusive way and doesn't need to necessarily compromise with larger audience, even do not need to be famous, but rather in the most appropriate way, such as literacy that will lead to the acceptance of them. But a little bit of a rebuttal. They talk about they talk about I POI them and like talk about productivity, but they already respond that most of the most of them are not equal to productivity. It somehow proves to you that all of their benefits are useless because they cannot really understand the context under the drag culture right now. Most drag resources right now has to fit with certain cultures, right? But before going to my argument, go ahead, POI.
Look, the politicization of explosive conservative politician you talk about are not a direct product of mainstream, but it is a direct product of conservative just wanting to use any minority they can.
The reason why Donald Trump are against those kind of things because they think that the only way to represent this drag culture is through the sexualization of them. But even when they're not showing as sexual, as you said, they are being sexualized anyways. But here's the thing. What's so wrong for me to sexualize myself, right? Because if you want to prevent those sexualization, I see Romeo and Juliet kissing when I was 10, right? But why then there's no story about Leonardo DiCaprio probably dating a drag queen? What's so wrong about that? Their sexualization idea is to prevent this drag culture to not be authentic. Because if drag want to be sexualized, what's so wrong? There are so many kids stories are sexualized anyway. Two arguments then. First, why rising of mainstream media is counterproductive to drag culture. Second argument, why then being famous and being in the mainstream media is not the interest of drag culture. First argument then, why rising mainstream media is counterproductive to drag culture. RuPaul and many other drag artists are writing many books that talks about their story and more deep about understanding them as an individual. The reason why they only credit RuPaul's shows is because that's the only thing you know exactly. What's the issue then? RuPaul Drag Race is much more famous, but it's not the same when he decided to become bold and releasing a book and talking about himself as a drag pioneer, right? His books were significantly less commercial success. Why the wrestling contribute? No, that's enough. Why the wrestling contribute to this? Two reasons. First, mainstream media pushing a toxic demand for drag individual, i.e., you need to be entertaining, you need to be fun all the time to be accepted by the majority. What does it mean? It limits to them to show their vulnerability to be success. But secondly, it creates a rising trend. Trend creates engagement on what people should discuss. Yes, drag are the queen of meme, but they're not the queen of pioneer of social causes, even in voicing out their issue. Because a conservative can be entertained by drag, but they cannot comply with drag culture to be normalized. What's the alternative counterfactual then? Three analysis. First, if there's less significant rising, there is more likelihood for people to engage with drag culture or even buying RuPaul's books and issue in a much more meaningful conversation. But even if they say, oh, RuPaul opened up so many doors and the existence of them in mainstream media allows more resources, we say drag are seen anyways, judges. The fact that they gave so many cultural significance to art, the fact of Beyonce acknowledged Renaissance because of the Black queer drag culture shows that drag is contributing to the development of society anyways. But these things are less highlighted. Therefore, Beyonce has to come up and voicing out through the Renaissance album, right? But lastly, even if you say so, the rising of mainstream media creates standard for drag individual to begin with, because you already showed drag needs to be entertainment. For only drag people in order to arise in its community, the only narrow way is to be entertained and to be, this comedian in entertainment. The only way for you to climb the ladder, that means it tells you that the only way for drag people to climb the ladder is for you to be sensational as opposed to be educational. But second argument is being famous under the interest of their culture. This is very important. A culture can exist. This is a principle. A culture can exist in minority community, but it can get major acceptance. The fact that an indigenous community can travel anywhere and being accepted anyways for the sake of diversity and inclusivity proves that it's okay not to be famous. This is what drag culture does not accept. Why this is the case? Major regulation that bans drag culture performance in public areas already exists in so many states and so many countries due to the fact that mainstream media interest it is a very crucial characteristic. Mainstream media having a very crucial interest in getting profit, right? Therefore, by sexualizing drag culture and represent them as the entertainment way is the only way to get profit from them. Why this is important? Because the mainstream popularization of drag culture fits conservative politician. What is the counterfactual then? Since most drag community are less in terms of economic opportunity, they have to be seen as entertainment, or else they're not going to be beneficial. What is the counterfactual we propose to you? Yes, maybe feasibility is less in our side of the house, but the radical backlash and explosive response from your side of the house that prevents them to speak up, that prevents them to show, to be seen, is going to be likely. Therefore, they're being silenced right now. Proudly propose.
Thank you for that speech. Now I invite the Deputy Leader of the Opposition. Here.
Am I audible?
Yep, all good.
Okay. Any PI just unmute. I wouldn't be looking at the chat. I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. I just wanna deal real quick with the alternative that our government wanna offer, which is first books. I'd just like to challenge who, if not in the community, would willingly read books about drag queens and would willingly be interested, because books is inherently boring and books have so many limitations that people couldn't really relate to. But second is that even the books that you say about RuPaul writing the books happened after the RuPaul show. So if you want to talk about prerequisite, then it become popular. The book itself become popular because the show in mainstream media become popular first. But third, I'm not sure why you think book is more educational than the show, because in the show there is still an element of education. For example, there is in-depth interview about who these participants are as a person, who they are, they're a college student, what kind of person, what kind of struggle that they have. So it's more than just their drag persona, it's who they are as a person. There's also interview questions about, why are you doing this? Why are you in this show? So there's question about motivations, question about what are you feeling when you are wearing certain dress, and why do you get into drag in the first place? So those would still be educational, because again, shows are meant there is element of that in the RuPaul Drag Race. Second alternative that they want to claim is offline events, which is first contradictory, because they say that regulators are inherently going to attack you, which means that it's probably going to be worse on your side, because explosive response are not only the direct result of the mainstream media. Conservative will always use minority as part of their political tools, which the most minority is drag and trans community, and that's why they are targeted. So it's gonna be harder if you want to do offline events. I mean, I can really imagine it. How are you going to survive the silent police visit, let's say, if you're that worried about attack? But offline events, if you want to compare in terms of monetization that they talk about, it's also very hard for you to make the traditional way of monetization, i.e. gay bar. Like an example is that Tracy bought the oldest gay bar, but have to close recently because of low participant turnout. So it's not that easy to make your own business for fellow drag and to be able to perform drag culture offline. So this is not monetization is not only a problem that we are facing in mainstream media, but it is a problem that is worse on your side, because at the very least on our side, there is a better leeway for you to be able to
POI.
make a living, as has been explained by the first speaker before. Sure, I'll take that POI.
Book is not our only alternative. There are historical document of their culture. Why is it not still being highlighted?
Who watch historical document? Can the next speaker tell me later what kind of person would be likely to willingly search that, instead of someone who accidentally on Netflix see that RuPaul is on the top 10 show? I think by likelihood of even initial exposure of seeing the title or knowing about drag, we already win. So one quick rebuttal about sexualization, and I think government saying that inherently there is censorship and you won't be able to express yourself. I think that's not really the case. I mean, if it's offline event, if you want to talk about censorship, certain age would also not be in the gay bar to watch drag culture as well. So I'm just not really sure what government is trying to offer in this debate. That's the caveat that I'm trying to say. So I'm going to move on to extension. I'm going to talk about acceptance, and this is going to be a direct response to government saying that there is minimum acceptance. Like drag is only being used as entertainment, and it's inherently hypocritical because you say you like seeing them, but you don't want to give them regulations that would actually protect them from the government. So what I want to cover in my extension is that I think exposure to drag is eventually going to be inevitable with how drag culture is becoming more widespread and how there's more participant in it. The question is that where should be the initial exposure be? Do you want it to be through mainstream media? Or do you want it through whatever alternative that they want to say about through historical book or through offline events? I think I wanna mention in here that mainstream media is consumed by general society. As I've said before, this could be unsuspecting people watching Netflix, wondering about what to watch, and see RuPaul is trending as top 10. If you don't click the RuPaul Drag Race in Netflix, at least you've seen it and you know it exists. There is a show called RuPaul Drag Race, and the face is there full of makeup that would probably be unfamiliar to you. Because I agree that for people outside of the community, drag is outlandish and it's probably incomprehensible because they use very bright colors, folks wear everywhere on their clothing, big headpiece, or ornaments. So initial rejection is extremely likely. It's extremely probably likely and extremely high because of the very noticeable appearance of drag culture. What I want to posit in here is that although there is that challenges, there is more likelihood of acceptance on our side when the first exposure is through mainstream media. There is three structural reasons why that's true. First is that you're exploring in privacy. You're less shameful about being curious about those things. No one knows what you choose to watch in private. You're less scared about exploring, about being curious what it's about. You're not ashamed for clicking that show and at the very least seeing the teaser of what it's like. That's why some people do that. If it's in public, if it's in offline events, you might worry that people will judge you for showing interest in these things that is branded as demonic. So there is already that initial filtering for the sake of people wanting to fit in with society, and that's why it's going to be significantly harder on government side of the house. Second structural reasons is that screen put up a barrier and a distance. I want to say that it is perfect to introduce something unfamiliar through a distance because they are a character on a show. They are not in front of you. You feel less threatened in nature. So that's why people, although they might not necessarily agree with drag culture or they might not they might have reservation about why are you dressing that way as a girl, or that extravagantly, but at the very least they don't have a physical aversion to it. The initial rejection is less when it's in mainstream media, because exactly you see them from a distance, and that's perfect for introduction. Third structural reasons is that the element of entertainment, it kept you on the show after you click it. For example, in RuPaul, there is competition. You want to know who wins. You want to know who got eliminated in that episode. There's different challenges in every episode. You need to make, let's say, fashionable clothes from recycled trash. So these are elements that is, I don't think that government should dumb it down into saying that just because it's entertainment that means it's shallow, because that's not true. That doesn't mean that the initial spirit of drag, of being proud of yourself and of expressing the way that you dress is going to be significantly hampered just because it's in mainstream media. So everything is a process and nothing is instant. At the very least, we have the initial curiosity that later can turn into initial acceptance. Even if it doesn't immediately go to regulations that protect trans and drag people, it is a step in the right direction. Well, I'm not even sure how your historical books are gonna help with that. There is no cross analysis whatsoever. So please, this should be counted as a contribution from opposition team. Proud to oppose.
Thank you for that speech. Now I invite the government whip. Here.
Hello, am I audible?
Yep, audible.
Okay, I'm going to start my timer first. My PFA preference is for you to unmute yourself because I'm not going to respond on the PFA chat, or raise your hand doesn't work either, so just directly. My pronouns is they, them, please be respectful. Let me set my timer first. I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. I think what missing from the opposition side is that they fail to acknowledge that trans people right now is already have like in the situation, in the status quo is already being although they still fighting for the right to get an equal treatment. They already established that because like more people are more aware of like trans people, queer people, basically people who do drag. They are more like acknowledge, oh, there is drag people in this world, and like it's okay. What they fail to acknowledge that most of the time drag culture is always being seen as being pictured by the conservative people as like something, the act of defiance, something sinful. Hence, like, although yeah, there is people who are welcome with them, there is also like there's this struggle with a lot of like hate crimes. They still there is drag show in US, even in US, that got like gun attack, and people still struggling to conduct safe and secure drag show due to this like extreme conservative people who like hate drag in particular. I have 3 clarification before I move to my speech. The first one, we are not against the representation of drag culture in the mainstream media. Of course, we like it. Like we want more visibility for drag people. This is actually something that already exists in the status quo. Even in homophobic country like Indonesia, there is drag representation. For example, Aming in Extravaganza and Bunda Dorce, or like other drag personality in Indonesian television. But this drag representation, take noted, judges, this drag representation is being accepted, being well accepted by the society, simply because like they avoided all the controversial stuff, exactly because it's not as famous as it is. That's why like people see like, oh, okay, as long as like we just it's give you the idea to the society, oh, drag people, oh, they are drag, and okay, that's okay. It's not to the level that we're trying to influence you, to basically like have this agenda of like turning your children into drag people. Second of all, we oppose its popularization because it's no longer serve its purpose anymore. Because like it's usually it's supposed to be a safe place, exactly right? Like you want to do a drag. To do drag without getting shot by someone when you do the drag, like where queer people can come together and having fun. We had that government wanted to be monetized to entertain people who barely care about our culture. You know, at the end of the day, if you like culture, you're gonna join in. If you don't like it, that's it, and it's okay for me as a drag person. Or maybe to the level that this show is being used as something even to love for by people who bullied our community our entire life. Imagine you are being bullied your entire life and now you have to walk to entertain people who bullied you. How shitty it makes you feel. Third of my point of clarification, non-mainstream media is not necessarily boring as what government trying to form, because you want to look it that way. Exactly, because like you say, oh, mainstream media is the only way to make it interesting. Exactly, you only fulfill the audience who doesn't really care about the drag culture in the first place, demand without necessarily have like this motive to introduce them to more deep and more human narrative of like what is the drag really about. And that's why non-mainstream media is also important. You can just acknowledge it and like just put it in the side. Oh, it's not important because like it's not interesting. Exactly why it's very urgent for you to make it interesting in the first place. Why the argument about representation is not true? Exactly because mainstream media main interest is to gain benefit as much as possible. They will make it controversial so many people talk about it, and the discussion is positive or not, they don't care. What they want is just to gain audience or subscriber. Once it becomes too controversial and getting blacklisted from many conservative people, mainstream media can just hit and run. They say they don't support the act of defiance drag people tend to have, afraid of the backlash. Mainstream media cancel other show due to this controversy. Mainstream media now will be more careful on using drag person to lead the show. Ghosts say it will give representation, but this high risk of getting blacklisted in the long run, they only proposing less representation. The parallel for this is like when Deddy Corbuzier inviting Ragil and his husband to do an interview. Like he didn't want to introduce how normal gay people life just like other people. He only questioned about sexual things. Exactly right. Full controversial discussion. This is what mainstream media gonna do. Like they're going to make it so controversial so people talk about it in the news. When Deddy losing followers, he then deleted this video and stopped making videos of discussing about LGBT. This controversy also lead for other media to not talk about LGBT again because they afraid of losing followers as well. This is the same case with drug controversy, drug culture become more popularized, right? Like now many people, many shows about drag people in the TV, people start to cancel it. They are going to threaten that we're not going to watch your TV anymore because like you are bring this woke agenda and stuff like that. And at the end of the day, the TV will not longer there's no longer representation. It's the worst case scenario that never been acknowledged by the opposition. Why even if they gain representation, it's still a bad representation. First, drag culture is supposed to be a safe place for queer person to be able to express themselves without any judgment. Means even people who are closeted can join drag without being afraid of their secret getting out. Not since it's getting popularized, you create the idea that if you want to do drag, you have to be famous. They talk about including more people for this culture like cheese strike man, but I think Goff didn't watch RuPaul really that much because like the strike character who do drag in RuPaul is already done a lot of drag show in the past. The way is like that. You want to start drag as drag chisman, you can just join local drag show with a bigger risk of getting mocked by his relative compared to they join drag show for the first time. But since many people watch them, they're getting an intense bullying. Now they hate drag, not because drag they don't like drag, but the bad attention from people that they get in the first experience, causing them to not continue this interest. Thank you very much for the time. Very proud to propose this motion.
Thank you for that speech. Now I invite the opposition whip. Here.
I will be using my teammate device here because the voice is better here. Okay. Koi through chat. Wait, let me open my Zoom so I can see the chat. Koi chat. Time opener. Here we go. If my voice perpet, please just tell me verbally until I stop. Okay. Starting my speech. In 3, 2, 1. Our stance is clear. We don't want the queens to sashay away from the mainstream media. We want the queens to grace more screens with their charisma, uniqueness, nerve, and talent, just like how RuPaul will it. So, several clarification before I move to my clashes. First clarification. Just to be clear, the context is not the context of rising in mainstream media is not a random social media post by a random queens or kings. It means two things. One, mainstream media means show like RuPaul Drag Race being shown on TV or on public streaming platform like Netflix. Two, the show are run by the community because most likely a conservative dude will not want to associate with it or work in the show, or simply it will not be in the conservative algorithm because they don't really look for it, or they will not click it on Netflix. So, sure, there will be people like Deddy Corbuzier who sensationalize gayness without any counter narrative set by actual gay in the world of government. But in our side, he will have the counter narrative set by a show that are run by the community in itself. By the way, gayness does not equal drag, just to confirm. Second clarification, the sexual thing from up was just a clarification because affirmative was worried about not being able to control public opinion and avoided being misguided. What we mean is simply on screen, the sexual aspect is merely racy jokes, or you have a lot of semi-nude fashion runway, but you don't show nipples, for example. But you will not see Katya on TV gesturing like she's eating dick, for example. It will be blurred because it's PG rated and it aims to destigmatize intermixing of drag and sex work. That's actually the activism work. Katya is still unapologetically unfiltered on her own niche non-mainstream YouTube channel. Subscribe to Wow Presence, by the way. So that's the two clarification. The last clarification is on fame, or in my LO word, exposure. We think that exposure is a big part of drag culture due to two things. One, drag is a freedom and artistic expression, most of which require an audience. And I'm not invalidating someone who does drag in private, yeah? I'm just saying that majority of them want to express it and want to be seen as that. But secondly, for a lot of people in the drag community, drag is a livelihood. You need exposure to gain customers so people will know who you are and they want to see and come to your cabaret. So that's what fuels the entire culture, is exposure in and on itself. That's why the marches in the past also features people utilizing their drag persona to march on the street and fight for LGBTQII rights. Those are all the clarification. My clash will consist of two things. First, it will consist on why visibility means presence and why presence is important. Second is in regards to practical support socially and through funds. So first, in regards to visibility and presence, this directly clashes with the counterfactual of government and the world that is set up by the government team. Their counterfactual is to gatekeep, is to be exclusive, is just to play in the offline show. The question is, in their world, if they still want to educate people, who will consume your books and historical document? It is only anyone that's already in the community and interested in the community. You will never clear up the misunderstanding that happens in the conservative. Even if it comes at the cost of potential exploitation, we will take it. The reason is this. What we want to do by visibility and presence is to ensure there is awareness and understanding. To what? To the general misconception and unfamiliarity that people have. A conservative might think that drag queens are sex worker, or they think they are trans, or they think they're transvestite. It is not the same. Now, through awareness and understanding, they just see that, oh, drag queens are like a harmless performer, just like any performer. So it also shows when DPM mistook Buddha Dorcha as a drag queen when she's a trans woman, and opposition knows she's not, because we listen to her show and interviews, and that's why visibility matters, to clear up that kind of misunderstanding. Sexualization of drag is more likely to happen when they see you in your cabaret show that is unfiltered because it's exclusive rather than on TV anyway. So that's about awareness and understanding. The second layer is on normalization. It shows that drag can come from all walks of life, from all over the globe. That's why Indonesia have Queen Raja, right? So historically, conservative attacks towards LGBTQIA related culture will happen regardless if you become popular or not. It is not caused by visibility. So trans people getting attacked and drag queens events being restricted is not directly caused by RuPaul thriving. Correlation is not causation. It may still happen in the world of government in their counterfactual. So in times where the right wing is on the rise and LGBTQIA can be utilized as a rhetoric at any moment, it is important for the drag queen community to have presence and awareness in public to counteract this propaganda narrative, right? Imagine the counterfactual in Gov. Drag culture is not rising in mainstream media, and then suddenly Trump comes in with the propaganda that they're pedophiles simply because they have charity event of reading storybooks to children. More conservatives are going to be in support of the policy to restrict drag events. Right now, if we do not regret it, the conservatives are divided because a lot of them watch RuPaul and follows the queens of personal social media, and they already get this stigmatized. So you will not have that division of opinion in the conservative if you do not have popularity. Before I move on to my third layer, yes, Poi?
The comparative is not that visibility is not exist in our side of the house, but it's less, just it's safer. Why then in your side? Why then you explain that in our side there's no visibility?
I'm not problematizing whether there is visibility on low or high. What I'm problematizing is attack will still happen to you. Why would you be safer and more protected if the visibility is low? Because you will not be able to counteract the narrative. People are still going to hate you because they don't understand who you are. So my concern is more on why low visibility can counteract the propaganda narrative. Now, thirdly, raising discussion of what space drag is supposed to be. The reason why it has to go mainstream for the discussion to happen in a safe and equal manner is because discussion about drag space involves identity. There are minority in the drag space because the majority, the plus norm, are gay guys. So discussion like what? Does drag strictly means cross-dressing, or should it be commonly understood like the info slide, exaggerated form of gender expression? Women can be drag queen, and can men be drag king, or must they always cross-dress? Can women only become king and men into queen? How should it be inclusive to non-binary and gender fluid? Should it include non-vulnerable individual like a cis hetero guy? So back then, even RuPaul, the icon herself, ever not support the decision of a trans participant and do not want to let her compete, even if later on he apologized. It shows that even in the drag community, there is a traditional norm that they still believe, and they still have to progress into acceptance, and they can only do that acceptance if whoever is in the minority, the drag space, can be supported by their own community. Lastly, about support and social funding. After RuPaul booming, there is a rise of queens and kings influencer, whether they do drag performances or be their drag personas, or they even do things like educating people on math, like follow Queen Santos on Instagram, or how to do housework if you didn't have a dad figure to teach you that. So we believe that all this popularization have risk, yes, but it is not the direct cause of the risk, and we believe that it brings much, much more benefit. It should not be regretted.
Thank you for that speech. Now I invite the opposition reply. Here.
Checking, am I audible?
Yep. Just to confirm, ini berarti Kak Jess ya yang reply?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. A bit odd, the trigger warning in my reply speech. There is a mentioning of some sample that might not be, might not be something that can be accepted in general by people emotionally. So yeah. Okay. I'm going to just start in 3, 2, 1. Right. Just to deal with the entire thing about conservative reaction, this is a very bad illustration, but understand that in a lot of prosecution against trans and also minority in a lot of different contexts, even in World War II, are very irrelevant to visibility, which what Grace and even first and second speaker has attempted to say, right? In the same way that Trump and conservative politician will always seek the ship regardless of them trying to be able to expose themselves. The difference is how many people that are able to rally with you and the amount of audiences that would be able to get the exposure that these are happening. So in the same time that prosecution happen. In the same time as well, that there are a lot of exposure for us in general audiences to know that, by the way, this person that you have watched on this particular show are currently under prosecution by this politician. They are being executed in this particular way. There are more connectivity on the community, which has been explained as well in the first speaker and second speaker establishment on positive case. But the most important thing when you are assessing the case of the affirmative is in regard to what the consistency, because a lot of your harm are going to happen with the excesses of exposure, regardless of what type of exposure it is. So when they start to say that they are still going to have a local show of cabaret, or they are going to still perform in a local gay bar, they have never explained to whether the protection are going to be better. Their protection rely heavily on conservative not being able to find this out. But when you have local establishment, there can always be a report, or people would still know, because like the first speaker as well has said, that you would still actively try to expose yourself through local activism, because these are something that are inherent in
Sorry. Reply speaker, putus-putus suaranya. Okay, now I hear nothing. Am I the only one? Atau...
Yes, I hear nothing too.
Okay, all right. Let me
Try
just...
to contact them.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I'm just gonna pause the recording.
and 3, 2, 1. A lot of their benefit are very contingent and dependent on conservative not finding the show, but this is not something they can guarantee, because they still also want to have local show, which means that there will always be an exposure to some certain extent. And just like the first thing that I have mentioned, the conservative in finding their shape would always try to identify who is the most minority of them all. But on top of everything else, they also try to posit to you that the quality of education they get is better, because they have some level of, quality like being exposed in the literature and also historical documents. But they never actually explain how you could be able to ensure that people are going to consume it. They never explain to whether that is the more meaningful representation that you need. Because when we say visibility, we don't only say number, we say the quality of that visibility, right? The ability for you to be able to see variety of people that can be drag queens, the ability for you to understand the motivation and also clarification that even some engineer student can also be drag queens, that contribute to this stigmatization that currently have, which is an identified problem that is ignored. Because the way that they try to deal with our problem is to just simplify it, to say that, yeah, but the conservative are not going to listen. But we are not only talking about conservative, because guess what? There are a lot of progressive people that also are not aware about the drag culture. But on top of everything else, even if we are talking about conservative, you're not talking about the conservative that are hateful, because that also add more burden in government to explain how different it is, their method going to look like to this type of conservative, which they never did. Which is why within the clarity of their ideal work, there is a lot of dissonance on whether or not that they can achieve the ideal condition that they have defined, which also very unclear in some regard, because sometimes they say that it is through, let's say, localization, sometimes they say that they want media, but the media itself is never clear. So the last thing I would like to clarify is in regard to whether or not that the inverse the coverage that you get through the level of publicity and entertainment are something that is inherently bad. They say this to say that why should we entertain the people that don't care about drag? But these are also something, again, because we have explained to some certain degree why that the number and audiences that you get are very contingent to your livelihood, because it is contingent toward their reaction, and it is a matter of protection that the drag queens is also going to get. The 3 things that we have contribute is quality of education, quality of benefit acquired by the community, but also the removal of stereotype. Please don't ignore that. More than proud to oppose.
Thank you for that reply speech. Before we end the debate, I invite the last speaker of this round, government reply. Here.
Am I audible?
Yep, all good, Kak.
Drag culture is inherently seductive, is inherently cunty, is inherently adult, but it's not porn. Mainstream rising is not exactly what we want, because even if drag culture exists in a very small community, we already proved to you it's still protected anyway. It protects drag culture not to be erased and not being demonized, even silenced. They lose because all want to push for the harder thing, but admit, yes, this doesn't always promote productivity. Even if it's true that the productivity exists, it exists in a very complicated manner and a very long time. You cannot take that assumption. They can't win on exposure and feasibility because they only prove presence but failed on its main benefit, which is productivity. The difference isn't about in our side feasibility doesn't exist. In our side, we prove feasibility exists, but in a much more safer way and in a much more exclusive way, which we already proved there's nothing wrong about that. They prove that, oh, they're going to be attacked in our side. I don't understand this, because if hatred is both exists in probably exists in both sides of the house. But we prove the pushing on rising, you put this thing on people who already hate you in their face. In mainstream media, make you feed the buzzers to feel the urgency, and you feed the conservative to feel the urgency to lower the rising. Therefore, it manifests in attacks, right? What is the clash? Like, let's talk about another clash then. They talk about acceptance, but it's all a lie, because it falls under assumption that somehow acceptance will exist, but also saying nobody wants to read books and watch historical documentary about drag culture. Exactly. That means they agree that our that our point on compromisation point is something that is true, because they dismiss that our point on compromisation, drag culture, has to adhere to mainstream media. In order to judge, we're not saying that the existence of them in the drag culture in media is something that is bad, but specifically the rising contributing to the more compromisation of this. But even if that, they exactly reject the idea that drag culture should be sexualized. Hey, for sure, mainstream media doesn't mean we all should watch Coco Melon, right? The fact that we already have 365 days in movies, but in the rising of mainstream drag culture has been silenced and even antagonized, because they cannot get profit of drag culture by not putting them as side character or even as a sexual character. Why this is important? We care more about drag culture and individual. We explain to you why this drag culture rising in mainstream media are creating harms that dismiss everything that drag has built for years and years, because rising mainstream signals significant demand that I already explained. We say it fits conservative politician. What does it mean? The rising signals that there is a significant amount of demand in the society. Therefore, it becomes an issue. Like, girls, look at the motion and engage, please. Like, how do you judge this? First, we already proved when they don't exist in the rising of mainstream media, it certainly prevents drag culture of being canceled due to the fact that lawmakers has little urgency or little sickness for them to be aware of this, right? Because therefore there is less probability for them to be silenced or even to not exist anymore. But B, we are still consistent. We say that the way the rise in mainstream media portray this culture creates standards for how queers should survive in the society exactly to please majority, and therefore create standards for other drag individual that they cannot publish books, they cannot publish documentaries. Simple. They agree that these things are going to be boring. Exactly, you agree for the compromisation. In our side, when the harms of the rising do not exist, the silence and the toxic standards that being put on them is less, and therefore they can survive and allow them to be taken seriously even when they are vulnerable. Drag culture, all vulnerable. They need to be seen. They're not boring. We don't need the rising. We need protection, and that's why we proudly propose.
Great. Thank you so much for that speech.